Hi, everyone. I think we'll get started. Oops. I think we'll get started soon. I think Thomas has volunteered to take notes, but if anyone else wants to take notes, that would be very much appreciated. All right. What? Oh, you got it. Okay. Do I need to approve it? Let me just make sure I did that. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go in and approve that. Okay, approved them. All right, why don't we get started? Welcome to VCON meeting for IETF 120. As with all meetings, please read and understand the note well and follow its guidance. We also want to make sure that we're having civil conversations and acting collaboratively, so please follow those note really well policies. We want to make sure you're aware of, you probably are at this point in the meeting, but logging in, and when you participate at the microphone, please use the tool to get in the queue. Some resources there. Okay, so the agenda currently has is as follows. Does anyone want to bash the agenda? Thomas had actually volunteered to also present, if there has time, some of the work that they did at the hackathon. And I thought that was a great idea. So if we do have time, he can go through those at the end. Anyone disagree with that? I hope not. All right, then why don't we move forward? And Dan, you want to present?
My name is Dan Petrie, and I'm going to talk about the VCON container draft and some changes and issues. Next slide.
By the way, not to interrupt, but we were able to make it a working group document officially.
Yes, actually, if you back up a slide.
Okay.
I had in parentheses there. I apologize. Actually, I should explain that. I had some difficulty with the build when we forked it for the work group repo, and I couldn't get it building in time, so I submitted it as 04 as an individual draft, and then over the last week and this week, I actually fixed it and finally fixed the name, got that right. And so I guess got it submitted as 00 as work group item. The documents are identical, other than like dates and a few other whatever formatting things that the tool introduced. So things I was going to talk about are CBOR and CDDL. Some additions and resolutions of some metadata from Jonathan's contact center use cases ID, some hackathon findings, and some other new issues. And actually, the first two are in the wrong order. I'm going to talk about the CDDL and CBOR stuff first. So next slide. Nope. Rather, this slide was wrong, but yeah, I'm going to talk about the CC use cases first. This is just kind of a review from the past, and this this table, which lays out all the metadata that Jonathan defined in the CC use cases draft. This table, which actually extends over the next 3 slides, is in the repo. That link on the bottom is wrong. It's missing the IETF part. So it's draft IETF VCON container. But this table is on the repo if you want to see the whole thing, and can't see it here on the slide. This is kind of tiny here. But this was stuff that was in Jonathan's use cases draft that was already in VCON to begin with, right? So it was stuff that he identified in his draft, but we had already had in there, and there's references to where that where in the draft the metadata is defined. So next slide. These were things that after reading Jonathan's draft, I thought were straightforward, and I just put them in. They went into the 03 version of the draft, and I didn't think there was any issues or anything more warranting discussion. So, but just again, for historical reference. And next slide. And these were things that we talked about in Brisbane. These were things that I had questions about, didn't quite understand, or wasn't sure where it should go in the VCON. And we resolved all of these except for the top one. Actually, the last two, I had some questions, and actually Jonathan came back to me on that and clarified. So everything except for the top one went into the 04 version or the 00, IETF version, workgroup version. The top one, actually doesn't look like Jonathan's here. It's unfortunate. But the top one I think is covered, but I'm open to other input. So the point here is the interaction type. Was what type of interaction was this conversation? And I think it's covered from the perspective of we have the media type for the dialogues, so we know that it's text or it's audio or it's video. We have a dialogue type, so we know, if it's part of a transfer or a conference or those sorts of things. So we know that perspective. What we don't have in there, and oh, there he is. My question for you. Yeah. Interaction type. So I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat just to catch you up here. We have the interaction type. We have, whether it's a text or audio, video interaction. We have the dialogue type, so we know whether it's part of a conference or a transfer situation. What we don't have is, this was an SMS exchange, or this was email exchange, or this was, a web chat exchange. So we don't have the specific application label in there. I don't know if that's needed, and so I'm open to input on that if people have an opinion.
Okay, Jonathan Rosenberg, I do have an opinion, and it's mentioned in the Contact Center document. I think a type with an enumerated list that's extensible would be good, and the ones at least for the Contact Center cases are an inbound call, an outbound call, manual dial call. I mean, I have a set in there, and then we can make them extensible. So include a few baseline types. I think it's useful.
I think is covered in ways. I mean, like we know who the originator is, and so knowing who that party is, we can infer whether it's an inbound and outbound.
Okay, so you want to infer it as opposed to an explicit type?
Well, I guess maybe there's two things here.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, do we need to know whether it was email or SMS or some web chat, or whether it was, whether this audio call was on the PSTN or whether it was on, WhatsApp? Is that detail important to anybody? Which I think is slightly different from,
That is different from what I'm talking about.
Right.
I think what you're talking about are a combination of like channel types, to use the contact center term, like voice or email or SMS. I presume I don't recall, is that also already somewhere in there elsewhere?
That's not in there. The channel label, and I was inferring from this that might be something interesting.
Absolutely.
But I don't.
Yes.
I don't have a need for it. I'd love if somebody does speak up and
yes,
tell me what it is.
If that's what you mean. Yeah. That is handy. I can send you a list of enum values.
Okay.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
So other than that, that's, I think from my perspective, all the metadata that's in in Jonathan's CC use cases, I think is covered in the latest draft, and so if people feel that's not the case, or if there's other stuff that they think that's relevant, I need to know, because I think other than this one issue, I think I'm done with the coverage. Next slide.
I think Thomas joined.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Thomas McCarthy Howe. I'm fine with the enumeration of an interaction type as long as it can be extensible. So as long
Yeah,
okay, great, sounds good to me.
So we'll define some types, but it'll be open to, whatever. The same thing with like participant type. Jonathan gave me some labels for that to put in as here's some standard ones, but it's open to put whatever you want in there. Anything else on CC use cases before I go on to CBOR and CDDL? Okay, next slide. So I've got like 3 slides here on CDDL and CBOR. I'm going to go through a bunch of stuff, and if you have questions on clarification of what I'm saying here, what's up here, chime in, but hold the opinions on what to do with this stuff until I get through this. I always had the thought that we should support CBOR in the back of my mind, and that it was on the roadmap and all that. And I was thinking there was a separate draft, but Rowan volunteered to help me because he was going through this with Mimi, and so I took it on, and I took a stab at throwing together some CCDDL. So we can define, generalize this from not just JSON, but JSON and CBOR. Basically, all I did was throw in the CDDL schema into the appendix, and I did a few quick edits to the draft. And I didn't, there's a whole bunch more that need to be done if we want to continue with this. But I just wanted to get something out there for discussion, and to be able to kick the tires on it, a little bit. I don't, if we do go forward with this, I don't want to have to reformat all the parameter definitions. I think what's in there is sufficient. There'll be a few, JSON CBOR specific things that they'll have to document, but I'm hoping that people are happy with the existing format of defining the parameters and the objects and all that, or whatever, and that will just, have special cases where it's appropriate. I still have a few things I'm sorting out with the CDL. I'm sure it's not quite right or valid. I'll get into that in a bit. I had some struggling with T-date and CBOR tag 21. I think I've worked my way through that, but there's still maybe some polishing to do. And just to be clear, no intention to support YAML. Though that comes with CDDL, but whatever. It needs sections on CWS and CWT if we're going to support CBOR. And so, so there's a bunch of work that still needs to be done, but I wanted to take a stab at it. Next slide.
Colin, did you? Yeah.
I apologize. So take this with a huge grain of salt. I haven't been involved enough to really have an opinion, but I don't really see what drives having both. It seems that having 2 things is categorically worse to me than having 1 thing. And I know there's the temptation. Maybe if we had 2, people would love us more because because they don't like us because of X. And I just don't, my experience with deploying CBOR in real situations has been horrific. JSON works great unless you have a very specific reason why you need to move off of JSON to CBOR. I would heavily stay on JSON. And if your problem is that it's too big, I encourage you to gzip both of them and see which is smaller, because it won't be the CBOR, right? Like if size is the only reason you're doing it, is probably not the right answer. If performance of parsing and things is the reason you're doing it, neither of them are the right choice. And having more than 1 thing seems like a wrong choice. And I'd take that all with a huge grain of salt. I'm not going to object to whatever you do.
Yeah, I would like to hold those comments till I get through these slides, and we can decide whether we want to do CDL, CBOR, or whatever. I definitely want to have that discussion though. But let me get through a few more things.
Yeah, Rohan, can you wait? Okay.
Oh.
You dropped the key.
Unless it's question and clarification.
No, we should have that discussion, but you can finish your slides first.
Yeah, so next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit about the hackathon because we did some work with CDDL and CBOR, both in preparation for the hackathon and, at the hackathon, and a redaction object too, but I'll put that off and we'll stick with CDDL and CBOR. Next slide. So at the hackathon, and in preparation for it, we did some playing around with CDL. My thought was, we've got a library for VCONs. Let's validate them, right? This is what we can do with CDDL. Well, I really struggled with the tools, both the command line tools, and there are various forms of them, as well as the Python libraries that the few that do support CDL had a lot of problems. They didn't all support all the operators. They didn't have really obscure errors that have no clue what it means. Parsing errors as well as just validation errors, and so I struggled with the tools. If anybody has some great insight on this, love to hear it. But that certainly made me question of, well, is CDL ready for prime time, and do we want to take this on yet? But we did successfully implement CBOR at the hackathon, so we can read in CBOR VCONs and write out JSON and vice versa, and convert back and forth, and so I'm pretty happy that's reasonable. The question is is how we would want to document that. We'll talk about benefits of one or both or whatever in a bit, but I just I wanted to talk about the kind of struggling they had with CDDL, and when we get to that discussion. So next slide. So CDDL or not, CBOR or not, if I do keep CDL and CBOR in, I realize there's a passive edits in there, and so don't bother pointing them out. I haven't taken a pass through the document to clean that up or whatever. So this is kind of the point of where I wanted to open up discussion of what are people's thoughts on it. I mean, I think from my perspective, the reason to support CDL, one of the reasons is size. I have contact center customers that do 5 million calls a day, and anything they can do to save, I know this is, Colin, you said this wasn't, you didn't think it was valid, but anything they can do to save 10% of disk space saves them a lot of money. Well, but it's at this point, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, just Steve Lasker. So I understand the CBOR and CDDL and going through SCIT and going through some of the other tooling. We've hit some constraints in there as well, and it's all about tooling. There are a lot of challenges with JSON, from canonicalization to other challenges, and I just think as a group, we should maybe look at if we think there's positives, is there opportunities for us to improve it? So I think that's where I'm trying to go back and say, what can we do to improve the tooling around it, so that we can make it. There's a reason groups started with COSI and CBOR, and the more I've used it, the more I've liked it. But I do find the tooling lacking. So I'm hoping we can fix the tooling as opposed to abandon the technology because it's not mature enough when this is the body that can mature it. So if we don't like it, let's propose fixing it as opposed to abandon it because we have this old thing, which we're used to the old thing. So that's all.
Any more comments on or thoughts on, CBOR, Jason, both?
Rowan's in the queue. We have a couple people in the queue. Right, we do have a couple people in the queue.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, let me see.
Rowan, go ahead.
Sorry.
Hi. Yeah, Rowan May. I actually had a question for Cullen. You said you don't think that either CBOR or JSON is the right solution if parsing performance is an issue. So is there another IETF spec that you think we should use instead that satisfies that goal?
Well, you can parse ASN.1 faster. No, I don't think there is. But I don't know why IETF spec is somehow a relevant discussion in here. This is the insanity that takes IETF shit down, is us thinking that it needs to eat our own dog food or something. Like, let's use what the industry wants here. Like, what do they want? Right.
So are you suggesting protobuf?
I did not suggest any of those things. Protobuf does parse fast, but Dan did not say that parsing performance, like, Rowan, you're just fucking with me, okay, first of all. So I'm not going to really respond to that. But, I mean, you're like, bring me a rock so I can make fun of you, okay? I mean, protobuf does parse fast, but doesn't have a stable ref, is one of the problems with it. But Dan said size was an issue, but the thing I said about size was gzipped JSON, in my experience, has been better from a size point of view than gzipped CBOR, right? And so I'm fine. Size, I can understand why size is very relevant if we're archiving crap loads of this stuff and we're keeping them around for many years or whatever. Like, that makes sense to me that size is an issue. But I don't see CBOR as an answer for that. Yep.
Yeah. So the reason I brought this up is because, like, I think that there are multiple applications for VCON, and in the sort of classic call center case, VCON with just JSON with gzip might work just great. But I can think of some specific use cases where parsing performance is important. And so that's why I asked the question. I wasn't just, I was.
So do you think CBOR has better parsing performance than JSON?
Yeah, I do.
Send me numbers, because I got numbers to send you. So anyway, I'm not in line up here, and there's several other people there, so I'm going to shut the fuck up and sit down.
Thomas?
Thomas McCarthy Howe. For another angle of how to think about this, I've been working with 4 or 5 different implementations now of VCONs that are outside of this room probably. And if we didn't pick JSON as the container value, there is 0 chance we would have gotten this many implementations that quickly, because it's very easy to put together a JSON implementation versus CBOR. So I think the penetration we're going to get with JSON is much greater. However, I will admit that, as we start to make these VCONs and throw them around, we do get some interop problems, especially with, date times, et cetera, which are being stored inside objects that aren't being JSON serialized properly. So it's not like it's also a magic bullet that it's all going to work just right the first time. It actually, there are some other issues that come along with it. I'm not very tied to either one from a technology standpoint, except to say this: we make a VCON once, then we consume it many, many more times. And so the people who create the VCONs typically are at the file layer, networking layer, people who actually have access to the conversations, and the people who consume the VCON tend to be JavaScript guys. Right. So in terms of like how often it gets presented into technology, I think JSON is the clear win.
I just second it with, I think that there's a lot of front end use of VCONs, and they want that to be in JSON. And I would probably position it as, do we do JSON or we do JSON and CBOR? Sorry, Jonathan?
Yeah, Jonathan Rosenberg, 5'9". I would prefer we have one format, not two, because if you have two, you have to go through the mandatory to implement, mandatory to use discussion for interoperability. You'll actually have to require implementation to support both. And so, that actually raises a complexity. I think this was Cullen's point. So I would rather pick one, and I would rather, and compression is definitely, like, absolutely the main requirement. Gzip JSON I think is the right answer for that. So I think, again, same as everyone else said, JSON's widely implemented. We would prefer that. Thank you.
Is it something we want to take a vote on?
Sure, we can get a sense of the room. Oh man, you're going to challenge me on.
Is it consensus that it should be either JSON or JSON and CBOR? You know, is that a reasonable thing to vote on? Is that?
I mean,
If I could maybe just make a recommendation, I don't think anybody is going to claim that we shouldn't have mandatory to implement JSON and you should support gzip. So the question, I think the only other question is whether it's worth having another format, which doesn't even need to be in the core draft.
Yeah, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Wouldn't need to be in the?
It doesn't even need to be in the main draft. I mean, if the tools were better and you wanted to have a CDDL schema that validated JSON, that'd be great. But I think if everybody is going to be doing JSON, then it should be JSON schema and not CDDL.
how about this question? Do we feel like one format should be the goal of the group? I'll wait till you vote. What's that? No. I'm sorry. He wasn't logged in. Okay, I think we're seeing pretty good consensus there. Just for the record, it was 10 yes, 1 no opinion. Should I ask something specific about?
Should that one be JSON? Is it
do we
need
JSON
to check on
versus
that or no?
CBOR? Is it JSON versus CBOR versus JSON gzip? Yeah, no, you.
It sounds like we're concluded, but just one final nail in the coffin of two things. You can't do two things and not have them both mandatory to implement unless you have a signaling protocol to negotiate capability, which is like just ruins something that's a file format. So like this, so just for like, yeah, but we're already on one. So I think it is JSON and gzip both required.
Rowan, you have an opinion here?
For the record, I wasn't the person who voted no on that last poll. So, it sounds like there is strong consensus that JSON should have, it should define a format using that. Sorry, that VCON should define a format using JSON, and that gzip should be required. And then probably the logical thing would be to have a JSON schema with which to validate it. My only ask is that I would like to be able to continue to have CDDL and like the option to use CBOR as a sort of, redheaded stepchild draft option. And I actually disagree with Jonathan that in the particular use case that I have in mind, it doesn't require negotiation. It would just be, it would be like it's sort of a separate thing that's either converted or is only in its little island.
Rowan, I can't figure out how to get in the queue, but just to ask a clarifying question. I mean, are you asking for an alternative file, a second file format, let's call it CCON, FluffyCon, and it's in CDDL, and there's a way to, and somebody has written a tool that moves between VCON and FluffyCon? Is that sort of the?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay, I'm going to register that media type right now.
I don't think anyone can stop you from having a converter tool to a different format, Rowan.
So
do we need to do a show of hands, or does everyone agree there's pretty much consensus on JSON with gzip?
Yeah.
At least in the room.
Yep. Okay, so I'll pull out CBOR. Do I leave CDL in?
We can ask on the list just to make sure as well. Just. Do we need a poll? Do we want a poll?
If you're not sure,
Yeah. Okay.
I'm saying how.
I'll be more prepared this time.
Okay. Hopefully we're okay with that question. Do we feel JSON plus gzip support is the way forward? I assume gzip would be optional, right? Or mandatory? I think supporting it.
Mandatory implement, not required to use. Just have to signal.
Right. That's right. Okay.
So
Jonathan said mandatory to implement, but not required to use. That's how you stated it. Yeah. Okay. I think we're getting pretty good consensus there. Right now it's 10 yes, 0 no, and 2 no opinion. I think that's pretty clear. All right. Anything else on that topic?
And so I'm taking CDDL out as well, right? Okay.
Is that?
Well, you could use CDDL to validate your JSON, right?
Yeah, I think it's independent definition language, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pull them both out. Cool. I'm glad I didn't do a thorough editing. All right, next slide. Some more hackathon findings. We worked on the redaction object, which is something that hadn't implemented and hadn't really thought through in depth. When I created this originally, I thought, well, all these things that have kind of indirection or reference things, like the dialogue and the attachments and the analysis, they all can have a body which is can be either inline or referential through a URL. So I thought, well, when we're referring to other VCONs, I should do the same thing. And so so we do this and we do this in the redacted object, the amended object, and the group object array. And so my thought was, okay, we could, should always probably have a UUID to refer to the other VCON. We optionally could have a URL where we can go retrieve that, and or optionally have a body where you include it in line. And in kind of thinking about this and in going through the implementation, I'm not sure that ever makes sense, actually. I mean, it probably doesn't make sense to create a tree of these, inline VCONs. One, it's big. Two, you need to, detach all those elements anyway when you want to use them. So why not just, use either UUID or URL to reference these, the less redacted or unredacted URI for in the redacted object, and is also may apply to the amended in the group objects. I'm not, I think, ready to decide that to jettison, but I am thinking that, and I just wanted to bring that up for discussion if anybody had an opinion. I'm not going to do it yet, but it's definitely something that I'm, kind of tooling with and thinking it may not make sense to have the body for the referenced VCON.
Thomas McCarthy Howe. So as we've been playing with the VCONs, what we're finding is the embedding of VCONs, when the embedding of anything makes the most sense when you're sending it across a network boundary.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, trust domain or
that
something
the trust
like that.
domain is right. You can't get back. And the other thing we're finding is you can find any use case for a VCON. And so as an example, the use case for this is I am a enterprise and I am responding to a legal lawful request for the conversation. And that conversation that I'm being requested of is a redacted conversation. So in that case, I could put that redacted VCON and keep the original in it to have one package that I'm sending across a trust boundary. So that's a case. Now, it's just as easy though to send two VCONs.
Two, right.
Right. And so I think my sense is simpler is better. Less things to break means less easier implementations and then interrupt. So I think I would be okay letting this one go because I for the one cases I can think of, there are other ways of doing it.
Okay. All right, cool. Good input. Like I said, I'm not fully decided on that, but I wanted to, solicit input on that. And if people have thoughts afterwards, I'd love to hear it. The other thing on, the redacted object, in addition to the VCON container, for this work group, I had always, in my mind, had thought, and I think it's in the charter even, that we would create define some other media types. One I think is pretty important that we do is the transcription, just because every transcriber comes out with a different format of a transcription, and unlike some of the other analyses that get attached to a VCON, transcription is an output from analysis, but it's also input to a lot of things, right? It goes into feed. If I want to feed this conversation into ChatGPT and prompt it with something, I want to feed it the transcription, right? And so having the transcription in a standard format, I think is a useful thing, because it's not just an output that we attach to the VCON, it's input to a lot of things. And in digging into the redaction object a little more, I think there may be a redaction analysis object as well that we may want to, again, this is just, thinking out loud here. But I think that there may be interesting to define a redaction for a VCON as some type of media type which describes the instructions of how to redact, not why you're redacting or what the methodology for redaction is, but here's a set of instructions for redacting this VCON. Again, just thinking out loud, but this is kind of some thoughts that came out of the hackathon. Okay. Next slide. Had some other issues that I heard. These are more kind of hallway issues that weren't on the list or whatever. Someone mentioned, is Ori here? Is he online? I don't know. But so Ori mentioned, remove the use cases section out of the container draft, because we've got Jonathan's draft, and hopefully we can get a few other maybe use cases. But so that was there was one bit of input. I had another input from Ori saying, take the GWS and JWT out of here and it doesn't, and let people do their own thing. I don't know. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I'll bring up these issues. I had another request from Jonathan Lennox to support separate recording files for each party, so that you may have instead of having a multi-channel recording, you may have several, one-channel recordings for each party in a conference or even in two-party call. I think most of it's there to do that. I have to go through the mechanics of that, but I think it's mostly we can support that. There may be a few things that need to be added there, but I will go through that scenario and try to see if there's something missing that we need to add. But we're pretty close to being able to support that. Then I had another comment from Jonathan Lennox. Would like to be able to stream the construction of a VCON. That one, that one, I think we kind of partially do that. If you cached all the parties and just started streaming the dialogues, you could kind of do that and then add the other stuff at the end. I think without totally rearranging the whole structure, I don't think that that's something that we'd be able to do very easily. And I really would hate to start over again and change that structure. It looks like, Jonathan, you have a comment.
Yeah, this seems really hard.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why.
Okay.
So I don't know, I don't see Jonathan.
Is Jonathan online? No. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So those are some hallway issues that I heard. I thought I'd bring them up. Love to have more input and thoughts on them.
I had it, from the floor. I think if we get into those things, then you're talking about more of like a playback format or something like that. And I think that's a lot more difficult than what we want to do here.
Yeah. Yep. So next slide. To do, I would love for someone to write up some things about emergency services use cases, right? I'd love to, I know that was a use case that we thought about. I'd love to see an ID or even just a long email, similar to the fantastic job that Jonathan did for contact center, give me some metadata, right? And some things that are missing or scenarios, and so that I can look at stuff. Same thing for messaging. Would love, somebody wants to take on writing up, some use cases for messaging. I mean, I've heard a few, and Rowan has presented a few outlines and stuff, but I need details. I need metadata that I can, figure out how it fits in or not or whatever. I got a bunch of to-dos in the ID. I know I have to fix that stuff. So complete the edits from Jason only to Jason and Cbor. Well, that's I'm just going to back stuff out. There's some missing examples that I need to that I have places for, and I haven't done them yet. Whatever, and so that's still needs to do. Cbor examples don't have to do that anymore, and don't have to document COSE stuff. Next slide.
Thomas, did you have a comment?
Oh.
So I wanted to, Thomas McCarthy Howe, I just wanted to take just the temperature for a second. One of the requirements internet drafts that I would really love to put forward would be something like we did in the hackathon this weekend, which was the integration of SCIT and VCONs, or requirements around governance of VCONs through their life cycle. So a VCON governance life cycle internet requirement draft. Is that appropriate for a charter? Is that in his scope?
I would, I mean, I'll yield it to other people who know better, but I don't think that's in our charter. There's no reason that you couldn't, put together an individual draft and we can, potentially talk about it, but
Outside the scope.
I don't think it's currently in our charter, is it?
Isn't there, well, it depends on what you consider part of the security and other things.
Yeah, I guess.
But
Yeah.
I don't know. Does anyone else have opinions there? I would have to read back the charter, to be honest.
Okay, we'll bring it to the list.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
let's do that.
But, an individual draft would be great. Either way. Next slide.
Next slide.
Yes, this is an old slide that I just updated. I need to do more explanation on working code on the referential VCONs. I made redaction a little smaller because we did a little work on that. I need to, we've been creating signed and encrypted VCONs, but not, just as demonstrations and not really been using them. And so I just feel like we need some more, experience with that to make sure that, we're heading in the right direction here. Next slide. Come give it a try, right? So there's, we've got the open source from the hackathon is out there, and we've got, a Python library for doing operations on VCONs. We've got a command line interface for doing stuff. You can pipe a VCON in and do things to it. And we've got a VCON server, or you can store VCONs and operate, construct kind of workflow kinds of things. Give it a try if you want to play around with VCONs. I think that's the last slide, isn't it?
That's the last slide, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan. So I think there's still more work to do there. So thank you. Jonathan, you want to come up?
So this can be really quick because there's nothing new. I basically refreshed the document just to have it. I have the slides I presented like 2 IETFs ago. If people really want to hear about contact center recording, I can do them again. Or you can just ask questions, or you can end the meeting. I'm like totally open to it.
It might be good to review it now that we're
All right, I'm gonna
official
go
working group.
All right. Okay, so people, everything you didn't want to know about contact center, right? Here you go. All right. This is a simplified sort of view of what we're trying to solve for. We got agents. We've got the sort of the ACD, as it's sometimes called, or the thing that actually does the contact center. It connects to networks and that connect to a consumer. Very easy. Next slide, please. It turns out that largely for historical reasons, a separate industry grew up around processing of additional applications beyond the core connect the caller and chat. So I'm calling those supporting applications, and those supporting applications including recording. So if we're doing it for compliance purposes, for archival purposes, and the main thing is this thing called quality management, which is if you ever call the contact center and it said, "Thank you for calling. This call may be monitored or recorded for quality and monitoring purposes." Have any of you ever heard that stupid thing? Raise your hand. All right, yeah, everybody's heard it, right? So that means that they did this, something recorded for a quality management system, and that's someone who listens to these recordings, and they have a rubric that they score the agent, like were they friendly? Did they, upsell the latest product or what have you? That's obviously a lot of AI is getting applied there, but it started now with just recordings. It also includes screen recordings, so also very common for an application on the desktop that basically takes everything that happens on the agent desktop and it uploads it. It actually combines it often with the audio recording for this quality management purposes. So the person looking at the agent's job can see not only what they said, but what they did Like, okay, you're supposed to enter the information into the case system, with the notes in the right format. Did the agent do that? So, why it's not really a fun job to be a contact center agent. You're basically spied on 24/7. I hope everyone knew that. All right. Next slide. So when a user goes to the supporting applications. So the main data flow, two data flows are relevant for the VCON thing, and it's usually different vendors, very frequently different vendors for these two things. So the supporting applications in the contact center industry, Verint is one of the market leaders, and Five9, we have some of that. And then we're also on the left. That's our main thing on the left. There's other vendors there too. So it's actually common for this to be a requirement for interoperability. Traditionally, it's done by like shipping around WAV files and proprietary file formats for the metadata that were then, people just built custom connectors. Just there wasn't, the ecosystem is maybe, 4 vendors and people just go implement to whatever those 4 people are. So here we have an opportunity to standardize it. Next slide. So I am not going to go through this, but there's a lot of information typically used in the contact center. These are complicated calls, conferencing, transferring, multiple participants is the norm. So, there's a lot of information there. It matters about things like the details of the participants, whether an agent or a customer, their contact information, PII and PCI redaction is a must-have, especially PCI redaction for these use cases. And then there's a bunch of unique things for the contact centers like disposition, which is at the end of the call. The agent typically marks it like sale completed or customer follow-up needed, and those are used to drive reporting and other post-call workflow processes in the contact center. So disposition skill is like the queue, like where you're in the sales or support queue. So these are super common metadata, and they're often used for these downstream applications. So for example, a quality manager might only look at recordings from a particular queue. And therefore, it's important to have this metadata in the file format, which is why I wrote the draft to sort of get a good list. This list represents the information that we use in our contact center. I think that was my last slide. Next slide.
That is it.
Questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that review. Anything else to discuss before we invite Thomas up to go over the hackathon? Why don't we do that, Thomas? I will.
Sorry, just one
So
quick.
here is the.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Thomas. Sorry, Dan.
I just want to thank Jonathan for the use case. I mean, it was great input to the VCON.
Yeah, Jonathan, thank you for that.
Great addition.
Actually,
Yeah, and I'm sorry for all the CDDL pain that you just went through. Yeah, to my co-author, I'm sorry.
can I interrupt for a sec? Do we want to do anything with that document, actually? I probably should have asked that question.
Say,
Yeah, or is it just used?
If I recall, and I mean, I don't know if the 80s, and like normally you don't bother with these documents because it's a workload on the ISG.
Right.
So
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I have no personal. Mary, do you have a different opinion? Go ahead.
And Dan had mentioned removing that section, so I just want to make sure we're good there.
Well, my thought would be take that document and expand it and show it as examples once the solution work is done, right? I personally find use cases really, really helpful. I had a wonderful document for STIR that no one wanted to work on, but I thought it would have been helpful. So they're a little bit painful to do is the challenge, right? Yeah. So yeah.
Sorry, Thomas.
We're happy to not publish documents. That's awesome. But if this would fit maybe in a reduced form into an appendix, you could stick it into the main document. You don't have to do a separate examples thing unless it's actual like a few years down the road, here's how VCON has been used.
Right.
If they're ready to go together, just do it please as one.
Okay. Which is sort of the opposite guidance you mentioned, Dan, but I think we should consider that for sure. All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Go ahead.
Great. So this is really quick. This is the hackathon that my team worked on through this weekend. We call it Scrappy VCONs because it was the integration between the Scrappy interface that's being proposed by the SCIT working group and the VCON work that we're doing. And here is the why and what. The why is humans have the right to know how their data was processed, especially when there are robots involved. And that's the presupposition of the hack. And this is actually what we did. So if you look on the left-hand side here, we have an agent and a customer who are involved in a conversation, which eventually comes up into a VCON. And this is where the hack story starts. That VCON, the life cycle of the VCON as it's created, processed, and deleted is also triggering rows in the SCIT transparency chain such that the regulators and auditors have a list of activity for that VCON they can use for their particular purpose. As we were doing this, we were keeping these events also in the VCON, so we had them in two places. And we went from creation, process, and then finally when the customer asks to have their VCON deleted, we also put that request and the deletion also on the chain. So from the beginning to end, you know what happened to your data. Next.
Next slide.
Dan, you have a question? You want to wait? Dan, are you? Dan? Okay, all right, good. All right, next. Okay, so what was our plan? We were going to put VCONs and SCIT together. VCON, you know it, you're here. SCIT, if you haven't been involved with that team, it is the software supply chain integrity, transparency, and trust. We've had a really great team working with that working group. And they're working on a distributed ledger for software supply chains. And Scrappy is their SCIT REST API, which allows a client like us to record the events onto the chain, and that's what we were testing here in the hackathon. So the question was, is it peanut butter and jelly? Do VCONs and SCIT go together really well, or are they like peanuts and chewing gum? And so that was the emotional thing of this. And so our idea was to implement that Scrappy draft, which we did, audit every VCON interaction and place it onto the ledger, and then implement a self-serve right to know based upon the ledger. And so that was what we decided to do. Next one, please. And so this is a visual for those visual people out there, what it actually kind of looks like. So on the left-hand side is our conserver. It's our VCON pipeline. And you see here a series of steps that the VCON goes through from a creation. By the way, this is actually real. We posted using Bria, which is our test soft client. We posted the VCON out of Bria into our API. And so every event here ends up showing up here in the transparency service. And one of the things that we had to think a lot about was what actually goes into that signed statement. And that took the longest time actually, because one of the things that we learned in the process was there's a lot you can do with SCIT, and there's a lot you can do with VCONs. So it's almost as if we could have chosen like 50 different ways of doing it, and we probably could have. So after we figured out all the different bells and whistles we had, we calmed down, and we decided to do one thing. So what we did here was we were on the transparency service. We have a list of what happened, who was the person or the authenticated identity of who said it happened, and then the version of the VCON that happened. And so one of the things that we recognized early was that if in a distributed network, you may not have an updated VCON, you may have a redacted VCON. There's all kinds of times where you may not have the same data that someone else does. So we put the version of the SHA hash of the VCON as a payload on that transparency service so that we knew it happened to this version of the VCON. The VCON ID was held constant, but we were able to snapshot every version that we took. by using that SHA. The two things that we ended up not doing for this was the actual VCON. We could have put the actual VCON on the transcript. We could have put the delta on it. We decided not to do that. We'll talk about that in a second. We also thought about putting attachment types. For this, we decided that was overkill for what we needed. Wasn't really required. Next.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
When you refer to a VCON and the same ID, is a VCON additive or those are each individual VCONs?
Yeah. So one of the things that we had to get our head around was what was the subject. So in Skit, you are making signed statements about a subject, and that subject can really be anything. We use as our subject the VCON ID. And that VCON ID we held to be constant through this scenario.
Right.
Because even though we were constructing it along the way, we found a lot more value in being able to keep the VCON ID constant and then account for the versioning.
Makes sense.
Yep. Very, very, very flexible. So at the end of the day, though, we did this. You go back for a second. I'm sorry. One thing I've got to say. So what we did was we inserted. We call these links, and they manage VCONs. And we decided to make a Skit link that would go after every link. That way we could point to places in the chain and go, this happened and this happened. So it gave us a lot of flexibility in what we said and when we said it. Next. But we also realized that we could also do it this way, which is to audit all links generically, which was to put a Skit wrapper over every link and then monitor what it said. We didn't monitor what it interacted with, interactions with the network, but we could have, we didn't. But we actually contained the link. Therefore, we could make some strong statements about what we gave it. And that really helps a bit too, because sometimes your provider, like if this link was offboarding into a LLM, this allows us to really understand what we told it to do without regards to what it did and vice versa. We can encapsulate it so we know exactly what it did in response to us asking. So we did it that way. It also ended up being easier, but very, very chatty. You would give a lot of events doing this, but it was easy and, of course, authoritative. So what did we learn? First of all, distributed ledgers are forever. Depending upon where you put the ledger, maybe you shouldn't put your VCON on it, because once it's there, you can't get it off. And so there are times and places where VCONs and partial VCONs should not be put on a ledger because it eliminates your ability to forget. So if you have a forget me service and you decide to use VCONs as the forget me thing, well, there's only so far you can forget because it's immutable on the ledger. So that's not always the best idea. Now, as I said before at the microphone, I can think of a million different use cases for VCONs. So sometimes you do, or you'll always find a reason to do it. But in general, putting personal data on something immutable is probably not good. Secondly, the hash makes a great version identifier. It actually becomes a lot like Git if you program. Git has this nice ability to be able to version the way the software moves and gets added. Every new addition is a new Git hash. That actually helped us to be much more able to handle the VCONs in a distributed network, because the question was answered, if I have this VCON and I know something happened to it, is the same version I have. If I hashed it, I could tell you that it was. So the ability to understand that. We didn't flesh out this idea, except to say that the redaction, the whole redaction idea actually does work out fairly well if you do the backwards looking ID on Skit, because you can redact, put that on the audit chain saying, I've redacted it and here's my ID. Then it makes it a new subject on the Skit ledger. So that actually worked out pretty well too. Okay, next. Finally, we were able to get the right to know, right to erasure thing done. This is one of my favorite parts of the VCON, that it enables the customer, people, consumers to be able to get their data, to see their data, to download it, to ask for its correction or deletion. So this is what we had from the last hackathon in Australia. And next, please. Now we have, this is a new addition to it, where if that VCON ID is on a Skit ledger, we will also tell you exactly what its activity was as recorded in the ledger. And so this subject big ID would have been a object ID for the VCON, which we didn't do. But that was working out really well. Next. I think this is it. And so what did we learn? Yeah, it's actually really great. It was very easy to use. All the ways in which they were thinking about software objects and signing them worked out very well for us. Very native. And as I said before, our first problem was there were so many different ways we could do it. Took us a while to figure out we should just, pick a way. I talked about VCON redaction holding up against new object IDs. And we did find ourselves kind of in this thing where we sign the VCON so we know what version we're talking about, and then we hash it and we sign it. We were just hashing it to keep the version straight. And I'm not sure if that's going to be something that we should add to the spec. I don't think it should be, but we did have to do that, and it was useful. Next. And that's it. We had 5 first timers on the hack. 3 people I work with. Josh, who is here in the audience. Thank you, Josh. And Benji, who just graduated college at Champlain College with his BS in cybersecurity. And then the rest of us are retreads. So we've been around for a while. All the work that we did is up there in those various repositories, all open for you to get. And if you're interested more in Scrappy, you should be. I think one of the biggest problems that we're going to face for people who use VCONs is, are you handling my data safely? And I think Skit gives us the ability to say, yes, we've handled it safely and we can prove it. So that's it.
Great.
Mr. Lasker.
Hi, Steve Lasker. Just a point of clarity, because we've taken that feedback and we incorporated the feedback around a ledger that's supposed to live forever. What do you do around important data that you probably want recorded air quoting on a ledger but being able to redact it? So what actually goes on the ledger is hashes, not the actual data. So in implementations, basically the payload or the signed statement are all in ancillary services, and the ledger includes the verifiable data structures without the actual data. So point taken, and we need to make that more clear in the docs, but that's exactly the kind of thing we want to make sure we could support.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And thanks to your team. We had a good time working together. A lot of fun.
Okay, any other comments? Thank you, Thomas.
Au revoir.
I think that concludes, unless anyone has anything else, any other business? Okay, thanks for your participation.